يعني Sunan Abu Dawud, the Jami' of At-Tirmidhi, Sunan Ibn Majah, and the Sunan of An-Nasa'i. We will start off with the Sunan of Imam Abu Dawud, rahimahullah. And as usual, we will speak a bit about himself, his biography, very briefly as usual. Al-Imam Abu Dawud, Sulaiman ibn al-Ash'ath, ibn Ishaq ibn Bashir, al-Azdiyu al-Sijistani. Abu Dawud is his kunya, as you can tell. His real name was Sulaiman, of course, Sulaiman ibn al-Ash'ath, from Sijistan. Sijistan, again, is from Khurasan, present-day Afghanistan, Iran, and the Eastern European countries. Basically, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, those countries. Even though he is famously known as the Muhaddith of Al-Basra, because later in his life he moved to Basra, which is in Iraq. He was born in the year 212. He was born in the year 212 Hijri, rahimahullah. And he traveled a lot, and he gathered a lot, and he authored a lot, and he was an exceptional Imam who was recognized by everybody during his time and after. He was born in the year 212, like we said. As for his seeking of knowledge, Al-Imam Abu Dawud, he started like the others very early, when he was very young. As he said himself, he traveled to Baghdad in the year 220. He traveled to Baghdad in the year 220. Basically, how old was he then? He was 8 years old. And he traveled to Sham in the year 222, when he was 10, basically. That is why you find he has asanid which are aliyah. He has asanid which are aliyah, which are high, because he traveled when he was very young. So he managed to meet and to take from the shuyukh, whom even some of those who were older than him took also. And those who were his age did not take from. That is why you find sometimes his asanid are better, meaning higher. They are more high than the asanid of Imam Muslim, even those of Imam Muslim. Rather, you find that he shared with Al-Bukhari some of the shuyukh. Some of the shuyukh of Bukhari are also his shaykhs. So this tells you how he has asanid which are aliyah. He took from a lot of shaykhs. From them, Al-Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, and he is famously known for him also, because he stayed with him for a long time, and he was a close companion of Imam Ahmad. And that is why you see even his Sunan, the book will speak about his Sunan. It is organized in the way of the books of the Hanabila, those who follow the madhab of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. Even his Sunan is organized the same way the fiqh books of the Hanabila is organized. Some of them say that. He was a close companion of Imam Ahmad. He has the Masail, meaning the personal questions which he asked Imam Ahmad. These are books which have been printed. They are available right now. The books of Masail is when the student, he asks the Shaykh questions, basically. He has questions which he asked Imam Ahmad about knowledge of Hadith, science of Hadith Ilal, and another one about Masail Fiqhiyah, fiqh issues, which he asked Imam Ahmad. Again, they're available, they're printed. Al-Imam Abu Dawud, rahimahullah, he also took knowledge from Al-Imam Ali ibn al-Madini, who's also one of the shaykhs of Al-Bukhari, and also Yahya ibn Ma'in, those three great Imams, Ahmad and Yahya ibn Ma'in and Ali ibn al-Madini. And also Muhammad bin Bashar, right? Muhammad bin Bashar is famously known as Bundar. And he also took, when he went to Makkah, he learned and he took hadith from Al-Qa'nabi, Al-Qa'nabi is another of the sheikhs of Bukhari. And Al-Qa'nabi is one of the students of Malik. Naam. And Sulaiman bin Harb and others and others. So you see that he is not someone to be overlooked, because some of these sheikhs, maybe even Muslim did not meet them. Maybe Muslim did not even meet them. Taib. As for those who took knowledge from him, there are many. Abu al-Walid al-Tayalisi, Musa bin Ismail, Muslim ibn Ibrahim, and others, and others. And like we said, he traveled a lot. Makkah, Medina, he went to Sham, and other lands, Baghdad. And then he returned to Sajistan, and then later on, 4 years before he passed away, he went to Basra. And he lived in Basra and died in Basra. As for the praise of the scholars, to show the status of this Imam, or maybe we should also mention that Al-Imam At-Tirmidhi is one of his students, yani, because he took hadith from him. Al-Imam At-Tirmidhi. And in the Jami' of At-Tirmidhi, which we'll talk about later on, there is one hadith from, one or a couple of hadith from Abu Dawood. Imam Tirmidhi has a hadith from Abu Dawood. Does Imam Tirmidhi have any hadith from Imam Bukhari in his Jami'? Just one. Does Imam Muslim have any hadith from Bukhari? No, none hadith. Okay. So Imam At-Tirmidhi, Abu Isa, is one of those narrated from Abu Dawood, and also An-Nasa'i. It has been mentioned. It has been mentioned. Something was still up to debate, yani. And others, Ibrahim bin Hamdan, Abu Tayyib al-Baghdadi, one of those who narrated the Sunan. Of course, his son is also an Imam in his own aspect, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood, the son of Imam Abu Dawood, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood. And his son is famously known, more famously known, for the poem in Aqidah, Al-Ha'iyya. Al-Ha'iyya is a famous poem in Aqidah. It's about 18, 20, 24 lines. Around there, 30 lines maximum. Al-Ha'iyya of Ibn Abi Dawood, the son of Abu Dawood. We did that here last year when Shaykh Dr. Hamad Al-Tuwaijiri from Riyadh, when he came here, he explained Ha'iyya of Ibn Abi Dawood. This is the son of Imam Abu Dawood, the son of Imam Abu Dawood. And also Al-Imam Ibn Abi Dunya, Ibn Abi Dunya, he is from those also students of Imam Abu Dawood, and others, we don't want to elongate this, and others. And most famously are those who narrated the Sunan from him. The Sunan, this book which we have today, want to discuss. How did it come to us? Most of the narrations are from Al-Lu'lu'i, famously known as Al-Lu'lu'i. This is the most famous narration of the Sunan, one of the long time students of Imam Abu Dawood. Al-Lu'lu'i is one of the long time students of Imam Abu Dawood. And another one is Ibn Dasa. Ibn Dasa also was from the students of Imam Abu Dawood. And most of the Sunans we have today, there's these two narrations. The one by Al-Lu'lu'i and the one by Ibn Dasa. Ibn Dasa. Those in the West meaning in Africa maybe, and in Andalus, they mostly use the narration of Ibn Dasa. And Ibn Dasa's narration has almost 100 more hadith, while the one by Al-Lu'lu'i has obviously 100 less hadith. But the scholars, they have said the one by Al-Lu'lu'i is more authentic. Why? Because Al-Lu'lu'i, he stayed with Imam Abu Dawood until he passed away. And Al-Imam Abu Dawood, as time went on, he still used to edit basically his Sunan and take out some hadith. So the one by Lu'lu'i, they said, is more reliable than the one by Ibn Dasa. So these are some of the students of Imam Abu Dawood. Like we said, At-Tirmidhi, who was the most famous, and his son, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood, and Imam Ibn Abi Dunya. Imam Ibn Abi Dunya is famous. He has a lot of books about the matters of the heart and softening the heart. Very good books, yeah, he compiled. And others. Al-Imam Ibn Abi Dawood, rahimahullah. And before we continue, there's something we should mention to show the just nature and the fairness which the scholars of hadith had, and that they treated this is the deen. This is not something light. Al-Imam Ibn Abi Dawood, it is famous, he said, my son is kadhab, my son is a liar, don't take hadith from him. Don't take hadith from him. Just like Al-Imam Ali ibn al-Madini, ضعف أباه, he said, my father is weak, don't take hadith from my father. This is the deen. This is the deen. And in the deen you have to be fair and just and upright, no matter who it is you're speaking about. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُونُوا قَوَّامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ, be upright in just and be in justice. شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ, when you give witness for Allah. وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ, even if that testimony you're going to give is against your own self. I will, even if it's against your own fathers. My father's weak in hadith, my father's weak in hadith. Abu Dawud says, my son is weak, kadhab, he lies sometimes. Don't take hadith from him. Don't take hadith from him. So this is something which you'll find in the books. It tells you again, for those people who have doubts, or maybe the Muslims, these imams, they fixed this thing. No, there's no fixing here. This is the deen, and these imams, they were very upright and straight. Because at the end, they used to do it for Allah. And Allah is going to ask you. Allah is going to ask you. Anyway, from the praise of the scholars for Imam Abu Dawood, Abu Bakr Al-Khallal, he said, Abu Dawood Al-Imam Al-Muqaddam fi zamani. During his time, he was the leading imam. رجل لم يسبقه إلى معرفته بتخرج العلوم, a man whom nobody else had preceded in knowing the different branches of knowledge. سمع منه أحمد بن حنبل حديثا واحد. His own Shaykh, the Imam of the Imams, the Imam of Ahl Sunnah, عفوا, the Imam of Ahl Sunnah, Imam Ahmad, who was a teacher of Abu Dawood, he took from Abu Dawood one hadith. He learned from Abu Dawood one hadith, which is something great for Imam Ahmad to narrate from you. It is something great. كان Abu Dawood يذكره, and Abu Dawood used to mention this, that Ahmad bin Hanbal took one hadith from me. Ahmad bin Muhammad bin Yasin, he said, كان Abu Dawood أحد حفاظ الإسلام. Abu Dawood was one of the حفاظ of Islam. من فرسان الحديث. Musa bin Harun, he said, خلق أبو داود في الدنيا للحديث وفي الآخرة للجنة. Abu Dawood was created in this dunya for hadith only, and in the akhirah for Jannah. That is how much they used to praise him. Abu Hatim Ibn Hibban, he says, Abu Dawood أحد الأئمة الدنيا فقها وعلما وحفظا. He's one of the leading imams of this world in terms of fiqh and knowledge and memorizing. وَنُسُكًا, and he used to be a person of a lot of worship. جَمَعَ وَصَنَفَ وَذَبَّ عَنِ السُّنَنِ, he compiled and he purified the sunnah basically. Abu Abdullah Al-Hakim, he said, Abu Dawood Imam Ahlul Hadith fi asrihi bila mudafa'a. Abu Dawood was the Imam of the people of Hadith during his time with no contest. Al-Dhahabi said, كان أبو داود مع إمامته في الحديث وفنونه من كبار الفقهاء. On top of the fact Abu Dawood was from the best or the greatest scholars of Hadith, he was from the greatest or the major scholars of fiqh. فكتابه يدل على ذلك, and his book, the Sunan, it proves that. ومن نجباء أصحاب Imam Ahmad, and is from the chosen or the best companions of Imam Ahmad. لازم مجالسه مدة, he stayed with him for a long time. Imam Abu Dawood was upon the madhab or the way of the Salaf al-Salih in following the Sunnah and living off the way of the people of philosophy. That is why in his book, there's the book of this book, Kitab Sunnah. His book is a Sunan, obviously. In it, like the other books, there's books. Kitab Sunnah is one of the best books about the Aqeedah of Ahlul Sunnah which you can read in Sunan Abu Dawud. Abu Ubaid al-Ajuri said, Abu Dawud, he passed away on the 16th of Shawwal in the year 275. So how long did he live? 63 years of age. 63 years of age. So this is briefly about Al-Imam Abu Dawud. This is briefly about Al-Imam Abu Dawud rahimahullah. Now we go into a discussion of his book. Obviously you know the Sunan. What does the Sunan mean? The Sunan are the books which are arranged in books of Ahkam, the matters of Ahkam, the rulings of the Ahkam, which we call, basically for easy understanding, we call the matters of the topics of fiqh. Tahara, wudu, tayammum, haid, salah, adhan, before that maybe salat al-nawafil, janaiz, zakah, siyam, hajj, talaq, nikah, buyu, those things, the matters of fiqh, ahkam. What is the difference between the Jami' and the Sunan? The Jami' contains more than ahkam. It might contain Kitab al-Tafsir, might contain the manaqib and the fadail, excellence of the Sahaba. It will contain the books of Tawheed, maybe a Sunnah and all of the rest. It's Jami'. As for the Sunan, it's only about the ahkam, practical rulings. The famous 4 Sunans, this is what we're discussing today. Now, Al-Imam Abu Dawud, rahimahullah, for us to know the book, for us to get to know the book, he did a great job, or he made our job easier. That he, the handout you have, this is called the Risalat Abu Dawud ila Ahli Makkah, the letter which Abu Dawud wrote to the people of Makkah when they asked him about his Sunan. After he compiled his Sunan, some of the people of Makkah wrote to him asking him, describe this Sunan of yours to us. So basically he wrote this small letter answering them, this is what my Sunnah is about. So like we said before, nobody can describe himself better than himself, right? He knows his book better than anybody else. That is why if we go through this, we will cover so much of what we have to know about the Sunan of Imam Abu Dawud. But before going to do that, I'll just mention some things and then we read the letter. He says, Ibn Dasa, he says, again, Ibn Dasa is one of the main students of Abu Dawud. He says, سمعت أبو داود يقول, I heard Abu Dawud saying, كتبت عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم 500,000 حديث. I have written 50,000, right? No, 500,000 ahadith. I have 500,000 hadith in my books. انتخبت منها ما ضمنته هذا الكتاب. I have chosen from those what are in this book, the Sunan. جمعت فيه 4,000 حديث و800 حديث. I have compiled from those 500,000 what I have in this book, which are 4,800. 4,800. That's what Imam Abu Dawud himself he said. Now of course, I said this again, I will say it again. According to the different prints, you might find different numbering. If someone has Abu Dawud on your phone, maybe, you can tell us what number you have. But himself, he said this, 4,800, approximately. Approximately 4,800. Most of the books you find today, they will have that number. They'll have 5,000 and something. Again, Imam Abu Dawud is saying approximately. Taib, approximately. We mentioned the name of the book, that is the only name which is known, Sunan, As-Sunan. Because it's a book of the Sunan, that's what he himself he said. As for those who narrated the book, we mentioned that famous 2 narrations are from Al-Lu'lu'i and Ibn Dasa. Ibn Dasa. Abu Dawood rahimahullah, if we must maybe mention that some of the praise of the scholars, we just mentioned the praise of the scholars, we mentioned some also for you to know the value of this book. Ibrahim al-Harbi, he said, لما صنف أبو داود كتاب السنن ألين لأبي داود الحديث كما ألين لداود عليه السلام الحديد. When Abu Dawood wrote this book, As-Sunan, hadith was made easy for him, just like the iron was made easy for the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. Al-Hakimi said, سمعت الزبير ابن عبد الله ابن موسى سمعت محمد بن مخلد يقول, I heard Muhammad bin Makhlad saying, كان أبو داود يفي بمذاكرة 100,000 حديث. Abu Dawood, when he used to sit and revise his hadith, he would go through 100,000 hadith. ولما صنف كتاب السنن وقرأه على الناس, but when he authored this book As-Sunan and he read it to the people, صار كتابه لأصحاب الحديث كالمصحف يتبعونه ولا يخالفونه وقر له أهل زمانه بالحفظ والتقدم فيه. But when he wrote the book, it became like the Mus'haf, the second Qur'an. The people of Hadith were busied by this book, and the people of his time, they confirmed it and they appreciated it. Al-Hafiz Zakaria Saji says, Kitabullahi Aslul Islam, the book of Allah, the Qur'an, is the foundation of Islam. Wa Kitab Abu Dawood Ahdul Islam, and the book of Abu Dawood is the handhold of Islam. Al-Khatib Abu Bakr said, the book As-Sunan, he wrote it before Abu Dawood and he presented it to Ahmad bin Hanbal. And Ahmad bin Hanbal, he said it is good. He said it is good. As-Sakhawi, he also wrote some great praise. So this is briefly, I don't want to go into detail into this. But before we start, I want to mention these words, and these words will repeat them again. By Al-Imam Ibn Tahir Al-Maqdisi. He said, and Ibn Tahir Al-Maqdisi, these are his words from the book Shurut Al-A'immatu Sitta. He wrote a book describing, it's like the course we are doing. He wrote a book about, this is the way of the 6 books. Or exactly what we are talking about. He said, وَأَمَّا أَبُو دَاوُدْ فَمَنْ بَعْدَهُ. As for Abu Dawood and those after him, meaning who? An-Nasai, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, whoever we're going to talk about today, these words are for them. He said, فَإِنَّ كُتُبُهُمْ تَنْقَسِمْ عَلَى ثَلَاثَةِ أَقْسَامٍ. Their books, you can divide them into 3 divisions. Number 1, القسم الأول صحيح. It is the ahadith which are sahih. وهو الجنس المخرج في هذين الكتابين البخاري والمسلم. And it's like those hadith which are like in Bukhari and Muslim. And whatever is in these books, these 4 books, is already there in Bukhari and Muslim. And whatever you're going to talk about this hadith is the same words you'll say about the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim. Number 2, صحيح على شرطهم. حكى أبو عبد الله بن مندى أن شرط أبو داود والنسائي, that there's some hadith which are not on the level of Bukhari and Muslim, but according to Abu Dawood, they're sahih. Abu Abdullah ibn Manda, he said, the conditions of Abu Dawood and An-Nasai, these 2, is إخراج أحاديث أقوام لم يجمع على تركهم, is to bring the ahadith of people, the narrators whom the scholars of Jarh Ta'dil did not all of them agree that these people are not, their hadith is not to be taken. So as long as the scholars of Jarh Ta'dil did not agree to leave this person, that his hadith are matruk, leave his hadith, then as long as he's not from that category, then his hadith are acceptable. These are the people Abu Dawood and Nasai, they put in their books. But if there's someone whom the scholars agreed that his hadith are matruk, leave him, they'll never bring any hadith of that person in his book or their book. Is that clear? Tayyib. And of course, the hadith has to be muttasil, has to be connected without irsal. Without irsal. Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he said, but we have to talk about something here. What do you mean that there has to be ijma' that the scholars did not leave this person? Because that is almost impossible. He said it has to be ijma' of a particular level, particular generation. If all the scholars of this generation accepted this man, then his hadith are to be accepted. Or if all the scholars of this generation said this person is to be left, don't take his hadith, then this is the ijma' we're talking about. Number 3, so those are the first 2 categories of hadith, divisions of hadith. The third division, أحاديث أخرجوها للضدية في الباب المتقدم وأوردوها لا قطعا منهم بصحتها. Hadith which they brought as supporting narrations, and they did not bring them because they are sahih. وربما, and maybe sometimes, أبان المخرج لها عن علتها بما يفهمه أهل المعرفة. And sometimes you see Abu Dawood or An-Nasa'i, after they bring this third division of hadith, they will tell you this hadith has this problem and this problem and this problem. The words which the people of science of hadith understand, basically. فَإِنْ قِيلَ, so if it be said, because this is the question which is coming, why did they bring this hadith in their books and they are not authentic? We say فَالْجَوَابُ مِنْ ثَلَاثَةِ أَوْجُهٍ. The answer can be in 3 ways. Number 1, رواية قوم لها واحتجاجهم بها فأوردوها وبينوا سقمها لتزول الشبه. They brought this hadith because there's other people who are using this hadith. So they brought this hadith in their books to clarify that these hadith are weak, to define them. So that those who are using them, they get to know, oh, okay, so actually this hadith is weak. Number 2, أنهم لم يشترطوا ما ترجمه البخاري ومسلم على ظهر كتابهما من تسمية بالصحة. That Abu Dawood and Nasa'i and the rest, they never said, my book will only contain Sahih Hadith. They never said that. They never went out to collect only Sahih Hadith. No, it was never their wish. They collected Hadith. So that is something else. If you ask why did they have this Hadith, because it was not their goal to compile only authentic Hadith. And number 3, you can say, they might say, Abu Dawood and Nasai might say, رأينا الفقهاء وسائر العلماء يريدون أدلة خصم في كتبهم. We have seen in other books, books of fiqh, books of aqidah, the scholars, they bring the proofs of the opposite side, who they want to refute. They bring the proofs to refute it and to define that this is wrong. These are some of the reasons, or the 3 reasons why Abu Dawood and An-Nasa'i might bring or brought this hadith in their books. As for the book itself, Al-Imam Abu Dawood, this is how he compiled it, we said. And this is how he arranges hadith. Just like a Muslim, if you remember. The most authentic hadith he'll put at the top. Then those which are weak as supporting narrations, he put them under that. But sometimes there's chapters where Imam Abu Dawood does not bring any authentic hadith. There's a chapter and then there's a weak hadith. This shows you again that he just, like he said, there's no authentic hadith which I know in this chapter, but this is the hadith people use. It doesn't have to be authentic, but he's just telling you, this is what they use. And mostly if it is weak, he will define, he'll tell you this is why it's weak, like we said. Al-Imam Abu Dawood, you won't find in his book mu'allaqat, a lot of mu'allaqat, no. Unlike Al-Bukhari and Muslim was a bit, yani. You want very, very few. Also, the athar from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, they are very few. Most of it is a hadith which are marfu'. They could be sahih, They could be Hasan, they could be Da'if. But most of it is ahadith. It's not athar. It's not athar. But the way he organized his book and the way he put the chapter heading, this is one of the things which makes his book very outstanding. As in fiqh, that's why the scholars, they said, if you want to know fiqh, put your time in the book of Imam Abu Dawud. Of course, with knowing which hadith is weak, which hadith is authentic, then you will get a lot of fiqh. You will take a lot of huge steps ahead. His book, especially in the way he outlined it and organized it, is superb. Amazing book. And you'll see that sometimes, like we said, he mentions the defects of the hadith. This adds you, for the person who wants to specialize in hadith, it gives you more and more knowledge, of course. He defines the problem with the hadith. He mentions the ilal of the hadith while he mentions them. Now let's read the letter of Imam Abu Dawud to the people of Makkah, so that we get to know exactly what this book is about. Now, who's reading? Read Abdul Fattah. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
May Allah send salah and peace upon him whenever he is mentioned. As to what proceeds, may Allah grant us pardon which is not accompanied by anything displeasing, and after which there shall be no punishment. Indeed, you asked me to discuss the hadith in Kitab al-Sunan, whether they are the most sahih of what I know concerning each topic, and I came upon all of that which you mentioned.
So you see, he is replying. This letter is a reply to someone who asked him, explain about this book of yours. Explain about this book of yours, whether they are most sahih of what I know in each of the topics or not. Naam.
So know that is the case, except if it should have been related of the two sahih parts, one of them having a higher chain while the narrator of other is stronger in health. So I occasionally would write, and I do not see in my book even 10 hadith that are
He says, yes, these are some of the most authentic hadith I know. But sometimes, he says, sometimes we'll have a hadith which has two ways. It has two ways. One way, it is a higher chain. It is a higher chain. Meaning there's what? Less people, fewer people. While the other one, there is a lot of more people, but those who are narrating the hadith, they are stronger in hifz. This one, it has fewer people, but maybe they are, okay, they are not the best. But this other chain, they are the best narrators. So what do? I might bring this one, which is the lesser people, because every scholar, like we said, wants to have fewer people between him and the Prophet ﷺ. So you might think, okay, this hadith, it is not the best. It is not the best. But it doesn't mean it is weak, because he says, like here now he defines for you this is what he did in his book. This same hadith, he has another isnad of people who are stronger. But because it has more people, he did not bring that one. He just brought this one. Naam. But he said, and in my book, I don't even think there's about 10 hadith which are like this. So 10 from like 5,000 and something. That is not even 1%. That's not even 1%. Naam. He says, and I only wrote 1 or 2 hadiths under each book. So you have the Kitab al-Tahara, maybe chapter of wudu, or chapter of tayammum. He only brings 1 or 2 hadith, 3 maybe. He doesn't bring you 5, 10, 15 hadith. Why? He says, for there will be too many, and my intent was to make this book easy for everyone. My intent was to make this book easy. My intent was not to cover everything which is there. You understand? Naam.
And when I repeated a hadith in any book from 2 or 3 roots, then it's only due to additional content, and perhaps it contains one additional word not in the other hadith.
We mentioned this also in Bukhari and in Muslim. Why do they repeat hadith? Imam Abu Dawood, he puts it very clear here. If I mention a hadith, if I repeated a hadith in any book from 2 or 3, 4 different routes, it is only due to additional speech content. There's an additional word in the hadith which has benefit in fiqh. You know, in the hadith of fiqh, especially ahkam, the hadith of ahkam, 1 word, 2 words gives you a lot of different meanings, additional meaning. So he says, this is why I'll bring the same hadith, I repeat it, because there would be additional meaning. Naam.
And occasionally I summarize a long hadith, or if I were to write it completely, some of those who heard it would not understand the place of fiqh in it. So I summarized it for that reason.
And occasionally I summarize the hadith. I summarize the hadith. The hadith could be long. He says, so if I brought the whole hadith, some people might not know where is the point which relates to this topic. Remember when we went through Bukhari? We went through that. There's some hadith which you have to look so there's some hadith which you have to look so intensely to find where does this hadith fit in the chapter of Imam Bukhari. Abu Dawood said, no, if I put the hadith completely, someone might be lost. So I just cut the hadith and bring the part which is connected to the topic. Naam.
And as for Mustalah Al Hadith, then the scholars of the past, such as Sufyan al-Thawri, Malik bin Anas, and Al-Awza'an, used to use them as proof until a Shaykh came and criticized them.
And as for the Mursal Hadith, he says, as for the Mursal Hadith, then the scholars of the past, such as Sufyan al-Thawri, great Imam, Malik bin Anas, Al-Imam Malik, great Imam Al-Awza'i, great Imams, he says, Imam Abu Dawood, they used to use them as proof. They used to use them as proof. But we know Mursal, is it Sahih or Da'if? What is the hadith is Mursal? The hadith where the Tabi'i does not mention the Sahaba. The Tabi'i just mentions this hadith to the Prophet ﷺ. So the Sahaba is missing. It is from the weak hadith. Imam Abu Dawood, he has Marasil in his book. Marasil, Mursal is one plural, we say Marasil. And at the end of his Sunan, is like a whole book of Marasil, Kitab Marasil of Abu Dawood. Okay? He says here, he says, the scholars of the past, Sufyan and Malik and Al-Awza'i, they used to use them as a proof. Until Al-Shafi'i came, Al-Imam Al-Shafi'i, and criticized them. And when he criticized the usage of Mursal, because there's a break in it. And Ahmad bin Hanbal and others followed him in that. So, is this true? The answer is yes and no. The answer is yes and no. The early scholars, Malik, Sufyan, Al-Awza'i, between them and the Prophet ﷺ is 2 people sometimes. Some of them learned from the Tabi'een. Malik took from the Tabi'een, a lot of them, Nafi' and Salim and the rest. Al-Awza'i, they took from the Tabi'een. So when the Tabi'een do irsal, most of it was sahih. But as time went on, now there's 4 people between you and the Prophet ﷺ, 5. For that mursal to be accepted just like that, it doesn't make sense. And that is what Imam Shafi'i said in his book, Al-Risala. He has a whole long chapter in that. Right? And this is what the scholars have agreed until today, that the mursal, it has to be examined. We said when we talked about mursal before, some of the marasil, we know they are 99% acceptable, like the mursal of Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib. But not any mursal hadith is just to be accepted. But the madhab of Imam Abu Dawood, he says, the madhab of Imam Abu Dawood is that what he means, he was of the opinion, and this is another reason why he brought weak hadith or mursal hadith. If there's no authentic hadith in a chapter, then it is better to put the mursal hadith. It is better to put the mursal hadith than to have the opinion of someone. Instead of writing, oh, Abu Hanifa said this, Malik said this, no. He says it's better to have a mursal hadith. Because that one, there's chances it could be sahih. It could be sahih. And that is the madhab of him and the rest, most of the scholars. They preferred, like Imam Ahmad also, to have the mursal hadith, or even sometimes the hadith which is a bit weak, over ra'i, opinions of men. Naam, read.
So when there is no Muslim hadith in opposition to the mursal hadith, and there is no Muslim hadith to be found, then the mursal is used as proof, and it's not like the muttasil in Islam.
You see how he put it there. If there's no muttasil, if there's no musnad hadith, we said what is the musnad hadith? The hadith is connected. Right? Aywa. He says, if there's no musnad in opposition to the mursal, yani, and there's no musnad to be found, then the mursal is to be used as a proof. But then he said himself, what is the last words he said there? What is the last word he said there? Look at your paper. Why are you looking at me? You see me every day. It is not like the muttasil in strength. So nobody should come and say, oh, Imam Abu Dawood said you could take mursal hadith. La. He said also, if there's no musnad hadith connected, then it is better we go to the mursal. But also no, it cannot be compared to the hadith which is connected, which is proper. You cannot say they're all okay. Naam.
And Kitab al-Sunnah which I have compiled does not contain narrations from a person who is matruk al-hadith.
This book, he says, like we read the words of Abu Abdullah ibn Manda, there's no, like Imam Abu Dawood, he said himself, there's no narrations from a person who's matruk al-hadith. Who's the matruk al-hadith? Someone whose hadith have been abandoned, rejected completely. Naam.
And when there was any munkar hadith in it, I clarified that it was munkar al-hadith and that there was nothing like it in that book.
And if there is a munkar hadith in my book, he says, then I bring the hadith and I also clarify after the hadith, this hadith is munkar and because of this and that and that. And why would he bring that hadith in the first place? He says that there was nothing like it in the book. Meaning, in the chapters, there's nothing I can find a hadith just sahih to fit this chapter. That is why I brought this munkar hadith. And I'm clarifying it is munkar. Naam.
And only a small portion of this hadith are to be found in the book of Daw'ah or the book of Wahiyah. And most of what is in their books is mursal hadith, and Kitab al-Sunan contains a good bit of hadith from the Muwatta of Malik ibn Anas, and likewise from the works of Hamad ibn Salama.
Salama. And he says, my Sunan has a good number of hadith from the Muwatta of Malik. Like we said, most of those who came after Malik, whether it is Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, most of them, their hadith are same hadith which you find in the Muwatta. The Muwatta has how many hadith? How many hadith does the Muwatta have? Didn't you discuss the Muwatta here? Yes, we discussed. Okay, so how many hadith does the Muwatta have? Your app has that. The Muwatta of Imam Malik. No. It's very few. 1,600 something. So you find most of those hadith also are in Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood and the rest. He says, my book has hadith from the Muwatta of Malik and the works of Hamad ibn Salama and Abdul Razak As-San'ani. He has the book Al-Musannaf. We talked about the Musannaf. Most of them also, there's a lot of marasil there. Naam.
And a third of this book, in my estimation, are not to be found in all of their books. I mean the work of Malik ibn Anas, Hamad ibn Salama, and Abdul Razak.
He says, and I have a hadith, yani almost a third of my book, which these hadith, they don't have them. They don't have them. Naam.
And I offer you depending on what I have gathered. So if some sunnah is mentioned to you from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which I did not report, then know it is a wahi, unreliable hadith.
Wahi. Wahi.
Wahi, unreliable hadith, except if it should be in my book from another route. For I did not seek to report all the routes, for that becomes too much for the student.
This is clear. This is clear. Yani. But this is something which the scholars, they said, okay, Imam Abu Dawud here, he says, if some sunnah is mentioned to you from the Prophet ﷺ, and you don't find it in my book, then know that this book, this hadith is why it's not a reliable hadith. This one is not true completely. It's not true completely, obviously, because there's a lot of hadith which he did not report, which are authentic. Now, that's why he says, except if I should find in my book from another route, then I could bring you that. Now,
And I do not know of anyone who has gathered in a comprehensive manner other than myself. And Al-Hasan ibn Ali al-Khallat had gathered of them some 900 hadith. And he mentioned that Ibn Mubarak said that the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam are about 900 hadith. So it was said to him, Abu Yusuf said, that they are 1,100. Ibn Mubarak said, Abu Yusuf accepts this defective ones from here and there from the weak hadith.
he says, Imam Abu Dawud, I do not know anyone who has gathered in a comprehensive manner other than myself. Does he mean he's praising himself? No. He's saying the truth. I know that nobody has done the same job I have done. Nobody has compiled a book so comprehensive in the Sunan. He's talking about the Sunan, of course, more than me. A hadith of only the Sunan, nobody has done a good job more than me. He says that Hassan ibn Ali ibn Khalal, he gathered the hadith of the Sunan, and he said there are 900 authentic hadith about the Ahkam, Sunan. And he mentioned that Ibn al-Mubarak said that the Sunan of the Prophet ﷺ are 900 hadith. That's what Ibn al-Mubarak said. The hadith which are about Ahkam again, they are 900 authentic. Again, this is still up to debate. So it was said to him, well, Abu Yusuf, who's Abu Yusuf? One of the students of Abu Hanifa. They said Abu Yusuf said there are 1,100, meaning how many extra? 200 extra. And Ibn al-Mubarak, he said, Abu Yusuf, he gathers hadith which are defective. From here and from there, he takes everything, meaning. He takes everything. Naam.
And any hadith in my book that contains severe weakness that I have explained, and from it is that which does not have an authentic isnad. And whatever I did not mention anything about, then it is good. And some of them, the hadith, are more sahih than others. And if other than myself had compiled this, I would have said more about it.
He says, and whatever I did not mention, he says in the beginning, whatever contains severe weakness, I have explained it. And whatever I have not mentioned anything about it, then it is good. Now the scholars here, they said, okay, we have to stop here. Are all the hadith which Imam Abu Dawud did not say anything about, are they all good? The answer is yes and no. They all have to be checked. That's why he said in the next sentence, some of them are more sahih than others. From those hadith Imam Abu Dawud, he kept quiet about. They are not all just to be accepted 100%, no. Some of them are acceptable, some of them are weak. Some of them are weak. Now, and then he says, if other than myself had compiled this book, I would have said more. This is from humbleness. He's from humbleness. Yes.
And you will not find any sunnah from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a good isnad, except that it is in this book, except if it should be some point that it is extracted from the hadith, and this hardly ever occurs. And I do not
Let's stop there. For those who don't have can you just hand this out to them quickly? Just give everybody will arrange by himself. Give like 2-3 copies of the sisters first. Well, you gave her only page number 4 then. Sit, akhi, sit. Do you have any questions until here? Any questions about Sunan Abu Dawud? Yes. Except what? He says unless if it's a hadith which is summarized basically. Unless it's a point which is taken from the hadith, then you won't find it. You won't find me missing that hadith in this book. Just figure out. How many do you need? Just 2 for the sisters. This one here. What is that? Yeah, they need 1 also, right? What is your question? Yes. We just talked about that, akhi. Read, Wasim, read, continue reading. This is great. He says, and I do not know of anything after the Qur'an that is more necessary for the people to learn than this book. He says that. He says, I do not know anything after the Qur'an which is more necessary for the people to learn than this book. And it will not harm a person if he does not write anything of knowledge after writing these books. That's a huge and bold statement to make. But like I said, most of the scholars, they will tell you, yes, it is true. Apart from the Sahihain, it is the book which if you spend your time on, you know all of the fiqh you might need to know. Naam. He says, and when he looks into this book and contemplates it and seeks to understand it, he will know its value. And that is true. Anybody who has looked into this book and studied it will agree with what Imam Abu Dawud is saying. Anybody who has not read the book will say, oh, maybe this Imam is conceited. No, he's not conceited. Once you read the book, then you know the value of this book. You know the value of this book. That is why Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah, he used to love this book, Sunan Abu Dawud. And the last book he read before he passed away was Sunan Abu Dawud. When he was passing away, just before he passed away, he asked for Sunan Abu Dawud to be brought to him. And he was reading, that was the last book he read. Now, he says, they need page 2, give them page 2. 3 or 4 of them. And as for these fiqh issues, after he says that after you read the Qur'an, and this is what I always say here to the brothers and the sisters, don't go delving yourself into all these websites and I don't know whatever you read and lectures when you don't know the basic Qur'an. You don't know what is the meaning of إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. You don't know what is the meaning of لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ. You are wasting time. Knowledge starts from the Qur'an. The basic Qur'an, Juz' Amma. Put it under there. Juz' Amma, which you read every day in your salah. That is where knowledge starts. And that is Imam Dawood is affirming to you. After the Qur'an, then you read whatever comes after the Sunnah. He says after the Sunnah, And as for these fiqh issues, the issues of Thawri, Malik, Shafi'i, then these hadith are their basis. So if you want to know the madhab of Shafi'i, the madhab of Malik, the madhab of Thawri, and Thawri had a madhab before, he just passed away, then these are the hadith which are their basis. Why don't you go to the basis, the foundation? And then he said, and that's why I put that in bold, very, very important. And I like that a man should write the opinions of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam along with these books. And this is something the Muslims, they need to revive. What was the madhabs? What is a madhab again? Fiqh opinion. That's what the madhab means, a fiqh opinion. He said, I like that the people start to go back to the fiqh of the Sahaba. It's amazing and very strange and saddening that people would pay attention and spend so much time on the fiqh of Shafi'i and Thawri, Abu Hanif and Malik or Ahmad, yet not consider the fiqh of Abu Hurairah or the fiqh of Ibn Mas'ud or the fiqh of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, Ali and Uthman and Umar and Abu Bakr, who are the greatest people to ever know Islam after its Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Very important. Now, he's He says, and he should also write the likes of Jami' of Sufyan al-Thawri. It is from the best books. This book is lost. It's one of those books which have been lost through time. It is not available. They said only a portion, small portion has been found. But the book has been lost. You know, the enemies of Islam throughout time, they're not just killing the Muslims. Whenever they invade Muslim lands, look, what is the first or one of the first places they go? The libraries. And they confiscate and they take over. Everywhere they go in Muslim lands, that's one of the first places they go. Throughout time, like the Mongols, by Genghis Khan and the rest, when they invaded Baghdad and they killed millions, the books they dumped, like we said last week, Baghdad was the leading city of knowledge in the Islamic world. More than Makkah, more than Medina. Knowledge, Baghdad was number one. Like we said last week. Ahmad bin Hanbal and the rest were there. When the Mongols invaded, the amount of books they dumped into the river, they said the river turned black due to the ink. If a whole river could turn dark, what is the name of the river? The Euphrates. The Furat, the Euphrates. It's one of the largest rivers in the world. It's not like a small trail, no. It's one of the largest rivers in the world. The Furat, the Euphrates, it turned black due to the amount of books which are dumped into the river. There's a lot of books which have been lost. This is one of those books. Now, Mashahir. What does Mashahir mean? Mashhur is one. Plural is Mashahir. He does not mean Mashhur in the terminology we learnt. What is the hadith Mashhur? The hadith which has? It could be the hadith is well known. This is what it means here. But what is the terminology of the hadith Mashhur we learnt? The hadith which has 3 but not more than 3 at any one stage. That is mashhur. The hadith which has 2 but not more than 2 at any one stage is aziz. And the one which has 1 at any stage is gharib. He does not mean that mashhur here. He means the hadith which is mashhur, linguistical mashhur meaning famous. The hadith which is commonly known. Mashhur is one, plural of mashhur is mashahir. He says the hadith I have placed in my book are mashahir. They are the well-known hadith. Now, except that not all the people are able to distinguish between them. What does that mean? He says these hadith are famous. Then he says all the people, they're not able to distinguish them. Distinguish what? Authenticity. Just because a hadith is famous does not mean it is authentic. Some brother came last night. He told me the hadith. What does it say? What does it say? Basically, he wants to celebrate Isra al-Mi'raj. Said, Shaykh, isn't it Shab Miraj today? And this and that and that hadith. There's no hadith which says it is 27th of Rajab. There's no hadith. Authentic hadith, no. Famous hadith, maybe. It's famous. Everybody wants to will tell you it's 27th of Rajab. The Prophet ﷺ never said that. He never taught anyone. The Sahaba never said it. That Isra al-Mi'raj happened on 27th of Rajab. No. So not every hadith is mashhur. It means mashhur again linguistically. It does not mean it is authentic. Yes.
And the thing to be boasted about with these hadiths is that they are mashahir, or a gharib hadith is not used as a proof, even if it is from the narration of Malik.
He says the thing I boast about is that these hadith are commonly known. They are not gharib. Gharib meaning strange. And he's not talking about gharib, the terminology which we talked about. No. He's talking about gharib, linguistical, which means strange. Strange hadith. There's some hadith are completely strange. Nobody knows. He says those hadith we should stay away from them. Even if it's said there's Malik is one of them who narrated them. He said stay away from those odd narrations. And the scholars, they used to emphasize this. Naam. Naam. Read. He says when you use a gharib hadith, obviously you'll find so much criticism. So why go through that? I have tried to compile the mashahir hadith. Hadith which are commonly known. Now. Yes. He said even if it's authentic, you try to avoid it. That's what he's saying here. Yes. He says, as for the mashhur hadith, which is famous, muttasil, it is connected. Sahih, nobody can reject it from you. Nobody can reject it from you. And Ibrahim al-Nakha'i said, he said, when you find a strange hadith, gharib, inshuduhu kama tanshudu ad-dalla. Announce it just like you'll announce your lost animal. If you lost your animal, you come and say, guys, I lost my camel. If people recognize it, they'll say to you, oh, it was there. If they don't recognize it, they'll tell you, we don't know where it is. He says the same of this gharib hadith. Announce it to the scholars. If they tell you it's okay, then take it. If not, then do not take it. And on this point, maybe I should add, it is not allowed to announce lost and found property, if you want to call it that, in the masjid. The Prophet ﷺ, he prohibited that. In the masjid, you don't come looking for lost and found. Or whoever is in charge of the masjid is not to stand up and say, guys, someone lost his phone. Please come see me. Not in the masjid. The masjid was not built for that. Maybe this is now strange for some people, but this is Islam. And that is why if you had read Sunan Abu Dawood like he told you, this would not be strange for you. It would not be strange for you. We have to learn our fiqh. Every book of fiqh, in every madhab, you will find the chapter of luqata, lost and found. This is a ruling which is agreed upon from what I know. Every madhab agrees on this because the hadith is pristine, very clear. When someone comes to seek his lost thing in the masjid, tell him, La raddallahu alayk. May Allah not return it back to you. When someone comes to do business in the masjid, tell him, may Allah not put barakah in your wealth. Outside, no problem. Outside. The masjid is not for business. It's not for lost and found. It's a place of ibadah. Lost and found, offices, not in the musalla. Not in the musalla. There, outside. You understand? Whether you found it or you're the one who's looking for it. Not in the masjid. Naam. I touched upon this. If he says, if there's no hadith which he knows which is muttasil, sahih, in a chapter, then he brings a hadith which is weak. Naam. Now he's giving examples of mursal or mudallas hadith. Hadith number 1, Hasan al-Basri narrating from Abu Huraira. This is known as mursal. Al-Hasan al-Basri from Abu Huraira. Naam. Ayo. From Jabir, afwan, not from Abu Huraira. He also mentioned Abu Huraira, right? Yes, yes. Miqsam. Naam.
As for the narrations of Abu Ishaq from Al Hadith from Ali, in Abu Ishaq only heard 4 hadiths from Al Hadith, amongst which there are not a single Musnad hadith. As for Kitab as-Sunan, in the hadiths in it that are like this one are few.
He says, even though I brought some of this hadith, but there are few in my book. There are few in my book. Naam.
And perhaps Al Hadith does not have but a single hadith in Kitab as-Sunan, for I only wrote it related.
And he said, this Harith, his hadith are weak from Ali. And I only have one hadith from him, and I wrote it belatedly. This is another proof that Imam Abu Dawood was continuously working on his book. He was continuously working on his book. Naam.
And occasionally there was something that established the authenticity of the hadith, so when that was hidden to me, occasionally I left the hadith off and I did not understand it. And occasionally I wrote it and clarified that. And perhaps I did not come across it, and occasionally I refrain from these types of matters where it is harmful for the common people for all of the deficiencies that were present in hadith to be revealed to them, because the knowledge of the common people falls short of this.
He says some of the hadith, I left them off because talking about them and their defects and the ilal and this and that is not for the common people. Like was this class is not for the common people, like we said in the beginning. It's technical. It's technical. It's not for everybody. It's a bit heavy for some people. Right? That's why he said, I did not want to put all this information in the book because it's heavy for the common people. There's no need for it. So I just avoided those things. Naam.
And the number of the books of the Sunan is 18 juz.
He says the number of the books is 18 juz. Now this is from his time, the way they wrote the books. Today it's not 18 volumes, obviously. It's not 18 volumes. Some of it is printed in one big volume. Right? Naam.
One juz of which is the Marasil.
We mentioned the last one. He put the Kitab Marasil. The last part of his book is the book which contains the Marasil narrations.
And of the Marasil that have been narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi
Allahumma
wasallam,
salli ala Muhammad.
there are those that are not authentic, and there is that which is Musnad from other vendors. And
It is.
it is Muttasil Sahih.
So he tells you here, from those Marasil, some of them are da'if, they're not authentic, obviously. Some of them you'll find a connected chain somewhere else. And some of them they are muttasil. Naam.
And perhaps the number of hadiths in my books are 4,800 hadiths, and about 600 hadiths are from Marasil. And whoever would like to distinguish between these hadiths along with their wordings, then occasionally a hadith comes from a particular route, while the common people have it from the route of the imams who are well known, except that occasionally he may have sought after a particular wording which has many meanings, and from those you know are those who have narrated from all these books. So occasionally there will come an isnad while it is known from another narration that it is not muttasil, and it will not be clear to the listener except if he knows the hadith and he has knowledge concerning them to
that he would come across the like of that which has been narrated from Ibn Jurayj. He said, I was informed from Az-Zuhri, while Al-Basani narrated it from Ibn Jurayj from Az-Zuhri. So the one who hears would think it is muttasil, and it is not sahih at all. So we only left it off because the asl of the hadith is not muttasil and is not sahih. And it is a ma'lul, defective hadith. And there are many cases like this, and the one who does not know will say, he has left the sahih hadith concerning this and brought a ma'lul hadith.
Mm.
And I did not gather anything except the ahkam in Kitab al-Sunan.
And now he says, yeah, in this book, he did not gather except the ahkam, the rulings, like we say, tahara, wudu, tayammum, haid, nikah, talaq, buyu', right? Hajj, zakah, ahkam, fiqh, which you call fiqh today, naam.
And I did not gather the books of Zuhd, Fada'il al-A'mal, and other than them.
He not gather books of zuhd, staying away from the worldly pleasures, like Imam Bukhari has Kitab al-Raqa'iq, the book of the heart softness, or the Fada'il A'mal, like we said, the book of the virtues of the deeds, or other than them. He does not have, let's say, Kitab al-Tafsir. Like we said, it's a book of Sunan. It's not Jami', it is Sunan.
So these 4,800 are all concerning ahkam. So as for the many sahih hadiths concerning Zuhd, Fada'il, and other than this, I did not report them.
Naam. Jazakallah khair.
And the mercy of Allah and His blessings, and may Allah send salawat upon our Master Muhammad, the Prophet, upon his family, and may He grant them complete peace, and Allah assist for us in the best disposal of affairs.
So this is briefly himself talking about his book, and I think we have covered most of what we need to know. Maybe some will ask how many hadith of this Sunan Abu Dawood are authentic. About half of the book, or more than half, we can say about 60% of the book is authentic, acceptable, between Sahih and Hasan. The rest, like he said, there's 600 Mursal hadith. That is quite a lot, right? Now Abu Dawood, we mentioned here last week that the hadith of the Sahihain, they're the hadith which they agreed upon. The same hadith you find it in Bukhari and Muslim. How many hadith are agreed upon? 2000 and what? 2514. Those are hadith which are both in Bukhari and Muslim, agreed upon. Then there's the hadith only Bukhari, then those are Muslim. Now the hadith which Abu Dawood has, which are not in Bukhari and Muslim, the hadith which he has, which are not in Bukhari and Muslim, they are 1,337. The hadith which Abu Dawood has, which are not in Bukhari and Muslim, they are 1,337. Naam. No, doesn't mean they're authentic or sahih. Some of them are, some of them are not. But it tells you how many are the hadith in the Sunnah of Abu Dawood. We say it all together, around 5,000. So how many are in Bukhari and Muslim? A lot. A lot. If you take away 1,337, that's almost 3,600 hadith. You'll find them in the Sahihain already. Now, so among the most, of course, today you have it in English. It's been translated and printed, Sunan Abu Dawood, by Darus Salam, with the verification of a Shaykh Zubair Ali Zai, rahimahullah, who passed away very recently, from the scholars of Hadith in India and Pakistan. Of course, from those who worked on this book is Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah. Shaykh Al-Albani, he authenticated the book, clarifying the Sahih from the Da'if. And they printed it in two separate books. Sahih Abu Dawood, only those that are Sahih, and Da'if Abu Dawood. And some people criticize the Shaykh for that, especially most of those who have wicked and evil intentions oh, the Shaykh is changing the books of Islam. No, the Shaykh did not say, don't go back to the original, the Asl. No, he had a project to make easy the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ for the common people. Because if you have to take Sunan Abu Dawood and read, like we said, there's a lot of weak hadith. A lot of weak hadith. So how are you going to define? So he said, the Sahih will put it together in one book. The Da'if will put it separately. But of course, afterwards it was printed in the same way it is, all together with the rulings of the checking of Shaykh Al-Albani. The checking of Shaykh Al-Albani. It is available. Sunan Abu Dawood with the checking of Shaykh Al-Albani. From the most famous explanations of Sunan Abu Dawood, explanations, Sharh, you have first you have summarizations. There's the summary of Al-Imam Al-Mundhiri. Al-Mundhiri, he also summarized which book? Muslim. Sahih Muslim. He also has a summary of Abu Dawood. It's not available in English, but it's one of the best books. One of the best books. Al-Imam Al-Qayyim, he worked on that and explained that. Came out a very good book. Very good book. Another of the explanations which we have to mention maybe, Ma'alim Al-Sunan of Al-Khattabi. Very good book. And one of the best, if not the best, is Awn Al-Ma'bud. Awn Al-Ma'bud, Sharh Sunan Abu Dawood. Awn Al-Ma'bud was authored by Shaykh Al-Allama Azim Abadi, Shamsul Haq from India. Shamsul Haq Azim Abadi. One of the best explanations, if not the best, of Sunan Abu Dawood. Shamsul Haq Azim Abadi from India, he wrote that explanation. Awn al-Ma'bud. And Imam Nawawi he did an explanation, but only he did not even get to half of the book or even quarter of the book. Just a bit. So these are some of the explanations which are worthwhile to mention and the summary. Again, it's a book which if someone is on that level, you think it's a very good book to spend your time on. In fiqh, they say if you want fiqh, you go to the Sunan of Abu Dawood. So do we have any questions about this before we move on to At-Tirmidhi? Yes. Yes, you have to go back and see what the scholars said about that hadith. Unless you know the same hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim, then you don't have to go back. Or if it's a hadith you don't know, then you have to go back and see what the scholars said. Is this hadith authentic or not? Because he himself, he told you, I did not compile only Sahih hadith. Very simple. Now, that is why those people who call this book Sahih Sitta, the 6 Sahih books, you're very wrong. They themselves said, I did not compile a Sahih book. Only 2 books that are Sahih are Bukhari and Muslim. Now, yes. Shamsul Haq Azim Abadi. Shamsul Haq Azim Abadi. From India. From the Ahlul Hadith of India. Do you have any questions, more questions about this? What time is Maghrib? Really? 49? Okay, we have 20 minutes then. We speak about Jami' At-Tirmidhi now. Now here you see a difference. At-Tirmidhi, even though it's included as the 4 Sunan, mostly people mention the 4 Sunan, meaning Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, and Nasa'i, Ibn Majah. But the book of At-Tirmidhi, we mentioned this before also, is actually Jami', it's not Sunan. It is actually Jami', it is more closer in terms of contents to Bukhari and Muslim, meaning it is a hadith of ahkam, and also fada'il, and also aqaid, and also tafsir of Qur'an, and also fitan and malahim, and the rest. So it's more Jami'. Al-Imam At-Tirmidhi, Abu Isa, Muhammad ibn Isa ibn Sawra At-Tirmidhi, from the famous city called Tirmidh. Tirmidh today is in Uzbekistan. He was born in the year 209 Hijri. As for his seeking of knowledge, again, like the others, he sought knowledge when he was very young, and he heard from Abu Ja'far As-Simnani, who died in the year 220. So it means Imam Tirmidhi, he was 11 when his Shaykh died. So he sought knowledge from young, like we said, like the others. And he traveled into a lot of lands to seek knowledge of hadith. He went to Khurasan, he went to Iraq, he went to the Haramain, Makkah and Medina, but he did not go to Misr or Sham. This is something which is noted from his history. He did not go to Misr or Sham. At-Tirmidhi, he went to Baghdad also, but they say when he went to Baghdad, it was after Imam Ahmad had passed away. That is why At-Tirmidhi did not hear or take any hadith from Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. From his most famous sheikhs, Qutayba bin Sa'id, and Qutayba bin Sa'id is famous, right? It's one of the sheikhs of Bukhari and Muslim. Qutayba ibn Sa'id and Abu Dawood, all of the 6 books, they narrate from Qutayba ibn Sa'id. Also, Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, Amir al-Mu'minina fil Hadith, of course. We know that one of his most famous students is At-Tirmidhi. We know one of his famous students is At-Tirmidhi. He is a student of Al-Bukhari. Also, Muhammad bin Bashar is one of his sheikhs, Bundar. Muhammad bin Bashar, Bundar is also one of his sheikhs. And Muhammad bin Muthanna was also one of the sheikhs of Bukhari and Muslim. And others. And Ad-Darimi also, and others. And Ishaq ibn Rahawayh. These are some of those who took, Imam Tirmidhi took knowledge from them. As for his status, to show his status, he says At-Tirmidhi, Muhammad ibn Isa, he says, قال لي محمد ibn Ismail, Al-Bukhari said to me, من تفعت بك أكثر من تفعت بي. I did not benefit from you more than you benefited from me. Imagine, Al-Bukhari is saying this to his student At-Tirmidhi. He says, I did not benefit from you more than what you have benefited from me. This shows you how he respected him and shows the level of Imam At-Tirmidhi. Al-Mizzi, he said, At-Tirmidhi أحد الأئمة الحفاظ المبرزين ومن نفع الله به المسلمين. One of the exceptional, outstanding imams whom the Muslims have benefited from. And Imam Al-Dhahabi, he says, جامعه, his book, the Jami', it defines for you his authority and his knowledge and his fiqh. That is why Al-Marwazi, he said, مات البخاري, Bukhari passed away, فلم يخلف بخراسان مثل أبو عيسى. Bukhari passed away and he did not leave behind anyone better than Abu Isa At-Tirmidhi. Some of his books, of course, the Jami', which is the most famous book, also known as the Sunan At-Tirmidhi, Jami' At-Tirmidhi, And he has the book Al-Ilal Al-Saghir. We know what Ilal is by now. At the end of his book, the Jami', at the end, he has the book Ilal Al-Saghir. It is connected. It is connected. Basically, he spoke about his book Al-Jami' and what is in the Jami' and like that. So whoever wants to read Sahih Muslim has to read the introduction, the Muqaddimah, like we said. Whoever wants to read Abu Dawood has to read this letter we went through for you to understand the book. Whoever wants to read At-Tirmidhi, the Jami', has to read Ilal Al-Saghir first. And also if someone wants to read the introduction, which was written by Shaykh Al-Mubarak Furi, in his explanation of At-Tirmidhi, is one of the best books for you to know Jami' At-Tirmidhi. From the other books he has is Shama'il, of course. Shama'il Al-Muhammadiyah, which is a book describing the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Description of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Physical description and character. How he used to talk, how he used to sleep, how Shama'il Muhammadiyah of At-Tirmidhi. And he also have Kitab Tafsir and Kitab Zuhd and other books. And other books. As for the book itself, Jami' At-Tirmidhi, it is found in some of the manuscripts he wrote, Imam Tirmidhi. The name of the book is Al-Jami' Al-Mukhtasar min Sunan an Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa ma'rifati as-sahih wal ma'lul wa ma alayhi al-amal. Al-Jami' Al-Mukhtasar min Sunan an Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ومعرفة الصحيح, and to know what is sahih, والمعلول, what is defective, وما عليه العمل, and what the scholars use. And what the scholars use. This tells you a lot about his book. Al-Jami', so it is Jami', it is not just Sunan. Al-Mukhtasar, all of them wrote books which are Mukhtasar. Otherwise these books would be tons. عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, of course, from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. ومعرفة الصحيح والمعلول, to know what is sahih and what is defective, what is not sahih. وما عليه العمل, and what the scholars use. And this is one of the things which the Sunan of At-Tirmidhi stands out from. He brings hadith and then he tells you, this is what Ahmad and Ishaq and Yahya, they said we act upon. This is what the people of Ra'i, they use. The hadith which people use for their fiqh opinions. For him to clarify to you. وَمَا عَلَيْهِ الْعَمَلِ. That's why you find him a lot in his book. He says, هَذَا عَلَيْهِ الْعَمَلِ. This is what the people use. Or he says this one, the people don't use it. Now, and some of them of course called it Sunan. And of course, briefly you call it a Sunan or Al-Jami'. Or Al-Jami'. As for the number of hadith, again there's differing according to the print you'll be reading or the verification, the tahqiq you'll be reading. But from what we have here is that it's 3,956 hadith. 3,956 hadith. I don't know what you have. He has one hadith which is thulathi. One hadith which is thulathi. What is the thulathi hadith? When there's three people between him and the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Dawood does not have any thulathi hadith. At-Tirmidhi has one hadith which is thulathi. And it is the hadith which we need today when the Prophet ﷺ says, يأتي على الناس زمان الصابر فيهم على دينه كالقابض على جمر. The Prophet ﷺ said, there will come a time for the people, the one who's patiently holding on and practicing the religion is like the one who's holding to a hot coal, hot burning coal. There'll come a time when someone who's practicing the religion properly is like someone who's holding on to a hot coal. I think that time is here. Maybe. Allahu A'lam. Taib, surround there. Abu Isa, he said, this is the hadith he has, and there's different narrations from him. As for the scholar's praise of his book, he says that Tirmidhi himself, I authored this book and I presented it to the scholars in Hijaz and Iraq and Khurasan, and they were pleased with it. And he said, وَمَنْ كَانَ فِي بَيْتِهِ هَذَا الْكِتَابِ فَكَأَنَّمَا فِي بَيْتِهِ نَبِيٌّ يَتَكَلَّمُ. نَبِيٌّ يَتَكَلَّمُ. He said, whoever has this book in his house, it is as if he has a prophet who's talking in his book, in his house. One of the things which is outstanding about the Sunan of At-Tirmidhi or the Jami' of At-Tirmidhi is because of his exceptional ordering. Very good in the way he has arranged his book. And that he rarely repeats a hadith, rarely repeats any hadith. And what is more outstanding, which stands out from the other books, like we said, after the hadith he mentions, under it he'll say, this is what Ahmad or Ishaq or Shafi'i held as his opinion. Or he'll say, this is what Abu Hanifa and whoever took as his opinion. He mentions the opinions of the madhabs of the ulamas after the hadith. That's one of the things which is exceptional. And he mentions this hadith, people act upon it. Or this hadith, the scholars have left it. Like that. Sometimes he mentions the grading of the hadith. He will say, I asked Muhammad bin Ismail about this hadith and he said it is okay. Muhammad bin Ismail meaning Bukhari. That is something which is exceptional about his book. About his book. And he mentions a lot about the defects of the hadith also. About the defects of the hadith. Now, like Abu Dawood, he says, جَمِيعُ مَا فِي هَذَا الْكِتَابِ مِنَ الْحَدِيثِ فَهُوَ مَعْمُولٌ بِهِ. Whatever I put in this book, it is from those hadith people act upon. And we say just because people act upon does not mean it is authentic. He said whatever I put in this book is from those hadith people act upon and the scholars they take it. Except 2 hadith. He mentioned except 2 hadith. Now we just summarize now. And remember the words of Abu Tahir al-Maqdisi when he said the books of Abu Dawood and the rest, their hadith are divided into 3. Number 1 are those which are like Bukhari and Muslim. Number 2 are those which are not like Bukhari and Muslim, but they're Hasan, they're acceptable. And number 3 are those which are weak. Are they weak hadith in Sahih Tirmidhi? Yes. In Sunnah Tirmidhi, yes, a lot in fact. A lot of hadith which are rejected, which are not authentic. Like the rest, he has books, and after every book under every book, there's chapters. There's chapters. And sometimes after mentioning the hadith, he will say, وَفِي الْبَابِ عَنْ فُلَانٍ. Maybe he mentioned the hadith of Abu Hurairah. Then he said, and in this chapter, there's the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud. He just summarized to show you that this is not the only hadith in this chapter. There's also hadith of Ibn Mas'ud or Abu Hurairah or anybody else. He does that a lot in his book to show you that there's other hadiths in this chapter from other Sahaba, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is mostly what we can say about the Sunan al-Tirmidhi. there's not a lot to say about it. But the outstanding thing, like we said, is he mentions the opinions, the madhahib of the scholars. And at the end, we said at the end he has the kitab, Ilal al-Saghir. In the end, he mentions his chains to Ahmad, or his chains to Ishaq, his chains to Shafi'i. Because he mentions the words of Shafi'i and Ahmad. How did he get those? At the end, he mentions that. That is the book Ilal al-Saghir. From the most famous explanations, you have Aridatul Ahwadi of Ibn al-Arabi al-Maliki, one of the best books in explaining Sunan al-Tirmidhi. You also have the book Tuhfatul Ahwadi. Tuhfatul Ahwadi, we could say it is the best explanation of Sunnah of Jami' al-Tirmidhi. Tuhfatul Ahwadi, written by Shaykh al-Allama Abdurrahman al-Mubarakfuri. He is not the Mubarakfuri who wrote Rahiq al-Makhtum. That is the famous Mubarakfuri we know. This is one of from his family. It's a famous family in India from the Ahlul Hadith who have worked on Hadith through centuries. One of the best books in explaining at-Tirmidhi is Tuhfatul Ahwadi. Tuhfatul Ahwadi. Of course, Shaykh al-Albani also, he worked on at-Tirmidhi, and he clarified the authentic from those which are not authentic, the Sahih from the Da'if. Now, maybe we should mention, so how many hadith did Imam at-Tirmidhi have which are special only for him? After we have mentioned what? Sahihain and Abu Dawood. Al-Imam at-Tirmidhi, he has 561 hadith. 561 hadith which are not in Bukhari, Muslim or Abu Dawood. The rest, you can find them in these other books. 561 hadith which are not in Bukhari, Muslim or Abu Dawood. We'll stop here and come back after the salah, inshaAllah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruk wa atubu ilayk.